So we're going to start the FY22 project reports for research theme 4, and how this is going to work is there'll be 3 minutes for the talk and then time for at least one question for each depending on the length of time. If you get cut off with your presentation or you have more questions, all of these presenters should also be there at the poster presentation time later this evening, so that's another opportunity to talk with them or to finish your talk. There will be a hard cutoff with the 3-minute time, and I have a cute little 30-second sign, so try to look for that. I'll be sitting right there, and yeah, so if you can all look at page 10, that's where the order for this section is. Ignore the other sheets that might be out there. And if you're in this section to present, when you're on deck, if you can come and stand or sit over in this area, that will just help a little bit with the transitions. The presentations are all in one PowerPoint, so there shouldn't be a transition there. So our first presenter is Scott Merrill from the University of Vermont, and he will be presenting on enhanced forecast design through experimental gaming and social impact assessment of connected river and floodplains.
Thanks. I get to be the first guinea pig. I'm Scott Merrill from the University of Vermont, representing the Water Resource Forecast Design Center. We have a couple primary goals that we were driving towards. One was improving the ability of our first responders, our emergency responders, to understand how forecasts will be understood and used by individuals and communities. The second goal was to really look at this forecast design center and how we can build it and how we can use it to understand different behaviors, risk metrics, things along those lines. One of the things I'm most proud of is in the first year, we were able to develop a really dynamic team that'll help us move towards our goals from undergraduates all the way up to our faculty. One of our real successes, I would say, is that we were able to convene a regional and panel focus group of experts in March. And discuss things like baselines of communication, what products they use for understanding floods and how to prepare for floods. This was really scientifically fortuitous because then we had a flood in the very region we were studying in July. So we were able to come back to the exact same group of people and ascertain whether or not their communication strategies worked, what products they actually used when the real flood hit. So we were able to go through this and learn from that and continue with that. We're going to have more focus groups in the future to look at and talk to those people. Another thing is we were able to create and deploy a serious game, a simulation-based experiment to look at how people's risk metrics changed when they're faced with different types of risk communication strategies. And how their experiences, both personal and within the game, how that dynamism came into play. We were also able to deploy a national survey, a national public survey to around 1,000 people that looked at public awareness and uses of different products, including national water products, as well as how they dealt with risk, how they felt about things like perceived severity, perceived susceptibility, whether or not they felt like they could actually handle a flood if it came. We've done actually a very successful job of research to operations and also operations to research through our multi-pronged approach of collecting data through serious games, through these surveys, through focus groups to try to understand how operations is working and how we might be able to influence them and develop these baselines. We have a lot of things moving forward, and we're very excited about the things that we can do in the future to try to understand human behavior and how risk perceptions and those type of things come into play. All right, that was my 3 minutes. How'd I do? So I believe there's time for a question or two. So, poster, we will have a tablet available so you can get a look at one of our CIROH games and experience that if you go to the poster session. So really encourage you all to come out to the poster sessions as well. All right. I think the 7-second rule is done. And I believe Melissa might be following me up. So are you introducing each? Okay. Thanks.
So our next presentation is from Melissa Kenny at the University of Minnesota. She will be presenting about empaneled focus groups to determine how end users respond to visual cues of forecast products.
Sorry. Good morning. It's great to see you all here. Even though I'm the one that's listed up here, this is a teamwork that's representing work from about 8 different folks at the University of Minnesota, the NOAA Office of Water Prediction, and the NOAA Weather Service. And the focus of our work is really to think about aspects of service equity, how we can use a broad range of social science research to improve the usability and use of water products by a wide range of folks. As a result, we've been partnering with the Office of Water Prediction and the NOAA Weather Service. Both of them are team members on our project, and we've been doing 2 things. One is we spent a lot of time just kind of understanding what water products exist, and then we got roped into helping the Office of Water Prediction improve the visualizations pre-public release of the National Water Prediction Service products. So these are the ones that are replacing AHIPs. So when you see those new visualizations come out, you can know that our team was part of the reason why some of those visualizations got updated and modernized so that we could incorporate best practices from social science research into those products and basically move from a research to development pipeline within a couple of months for something like the NWPS and the integration of social science research in that. Second thing is we've been working with the National Weather Service to develop relationships with warning coordination meteorologists and service coordination hydrologists to really understand how they effectively engage and reach out to different constituencies that they reach out to with the communication of NOAA products. We're developing a list of best practices of how they do that, as well as gaps to be able to advance service equity. So a number of our results have been some of these partnerships with different NOAA units to be able to accelerate the research to operations pipeline, knowledge exchange, developing a set of solutions and not just a set of problems where social science can really optimize and support the use of water products, and thinking about how some of the communications insights can be advanced in order to support service equity. In terms of self-assessment, we're pretty proud that we actually have some of our research results being operationalized as we speak, and we're going to be really excited to see that coming out in Q2. And let me just stop there. We got a bunch of things on the horizon, but if you want to know more about that, come see us at the poster. Also, if you want to see graphics of how things have morphed and changed based off of some social science research, or take a deep dive, if you want to share one of your products with me and get us to do a little bit of like on the spot diagnosis, come see us at the poster session tonight. Thanks. I'm happy to take a question or two, or to have individual conversations during the lunch hour. Hey, Beverly. Looks like one's coming. Our online friends can't hear very well without mics.
Thanks for your presentation, Melissa. I'm wondering if you have any insights you can offer to others in the consortium about making those connections to NOAA. It seems like you built off of some momentum you had before, and just any insights you could add about that or offer. The links to the operational folks within the federal agencies that you've been able to capitalize on.
Maybe I think this is best described by my philosophy. So I direct a research institute. I direct our research portfolio at an institute across 5 University of Minnesota campuses. And what I tell grantees is the exact same thing as the advice I'd give you all, is first you build relationships, and then you collaboratively develop ideas, and then you pursue research and work to do together. So my first 6 months, we didn't know what project we were working on because we were just meeting with people and getting to know them, understanding the landscape, understanding who was really interested in working with us, where we might be able to get some not easy wins, but maybe some quick wins because there was an interest and willingness to work together. And I think if you put relationships on the back end, everything's transactional. You can't fast track anything that's big. If you prioritize relationships and things that you might be able to do together, then you can do big things. So that's my advice, and that's how all of this was established, was a genuine interest in understanding them and seeing what we might be able to do together. And there's a lot of other conversations where it wasn't the right time, but maybe it will be in the future. Thank you.
Our next presentation is by Matt Van Dyke from the University of Alabama about exploring decision makers and public risk perception and information seeking behaviors related to water quantity in the southeastern U.S.
Hello, good morning, everyone. Obviously, I'm not Matt. Hopefully, you're not disappointed with that. My name is Wanyun Xiao. I'm a faculty member at the Department of Geography here at the University of Alabama. Welcome to UA if this is your first time to visit us. Today, I'm going to talk about this project. The title is self-evident there. Compared to many other CIROH projects, ours is relatively small. So the team mainly consists of me and Matt. So today, I'm gonna talk about this project with you. So the proposed goals and objectives, we try to measure. The first objective is to measure and map social vulnerability to both floods and droughts in the entire southeastern U.S. And the second objective is to measure, map, and analyze flood and drought risk perceptions in the southeastern U.S. So I want to highlight the second objective because nowadays a rapidly growing number of studies are focused on assessing social vulnerability to various natural hazards, including drought and flood at various geographic areas. But the uniqueness of our project is to map the variation of risk perceptions of these 2 particular hydrological hazards in the southeastern U.S. The aim is to integrate that physical exposure, that social vulnerability layer, geographic information layer with the risk perceptions, so that the behavioral dimension, so that the integration of the social dimension and the behavioral dimension can give us a more comprehensive picture of which particular communities are highly vulnerable to these hazards, so that we can target our communication efforts at those communities, which brings us to the third objective, to identify and analyze risk communication and information opportunities in communities with high social vulnerability and low risk perceptions. So our goal is to first identify those communities. Then we target our efforts so that we won't waste too much time by casting a large net. And key results, so we are finalizing phase 1, and phase 1 is to measure and map social vulnerability to flood and drought. Our effort is mostly based on aggregating data provided by the U.S. Census focused on the Southeast US. And in terms of the impact self-assessment, our project has been progressing a little bit slower than expected. And as we all know, things happen sometimes. And for instance, Matt recruited a doctoral student just this fall. With that said, I'm pretty confident that we are on the right track. So we will eventually deliver meaningful impact related to mitigating and correcting potential barriers to flood and drought risk communication. And we will improve information dissemination and exchange around flood and drought hazards in sociable, vulnerable communities in this study region. So the next step, we will distribute a survey this fall, and we will map, based on the survey results combined with the census data, we will map the geographic variation of risk perceptions at the county level in the Southeast US in spring of 2024. If you have any questions about how to map risk perceptions, I will be more than happy to answer your questions just a little bit. And the third step is to identify, investigate communities with high social vulnerability and low risk perceptions of flood routes in the spring and summer of 2024. With that, I'm happy to answer any questions you might have.
Thank you for the presentation. To what extent does a community's perception of risk also involve their, I guess, trust of the source of information on floods and droughts?
So your question is?
To what extent does, when you go to assess their perception of risk, their risk perception,
Yes.
to measure that,
Yes.
does that include, I guess, is a lack of trust in an authoritative sources of information, is that also a lack of perception, or is that a measure of something else?
So if I understand, thank you so much for your question. That's a great question. If I understand your question correctly, are you asking that whether or not we are going to, along with the risk perceptions, whether or not we are going to measure trust in the information sources?
Right. Yeah. So I'm wondering, so you're looking at high vulnerability and low risk perception, right? You kind of focused
Yes.
on that.
Yes.
Does that low risk perception, would that include the instance where, say, a community had low trust in, basically, if let's say perception is seeing, let's say for whatever reason the community members did not believe what they were seeing?
Yeah.
Does that make sense? Yeah.
Yes.
As an
definitely.
analogy. Yeah.
Yes, thank you so much. It's our plan to also measure trust in information sources in this survey. We can also map out the variation of trust in information sources in the study area, along with risk perceptions. So risk perception are the end results of a combination of factors. Trust obviously is one critical factor, along with many other factors. We will design a comprehensive survey questionnaire and also including the questions you just raised. Thank you for your question. Thank you very much.
Our next presenter is George Van Houten from RTI International, and he is presenting a framework for connecting forecast system investments to economic and societal value.
Everyone, yeah, so this is a project that I'm working on with my colleagues at RTI, Katie Van Merkhoven and Jill Brown, who are over there, and Emily Decker, who's not here, and a few others who are not here. So like the other projects, our main objective is to support research theme 4, in our case, by developing and demonstrating a framework for estimating the economic benefits of investments in stream flow forecasts and as it's evolved really more specifically in flood forecasts and flood warning systems. And we're doing this by drawing on concepts from value of information analysis, or VOI analysis, which is commonly used in decision science and economics for valuing reductions in uncertainty, and specifically uncertainty in parameters that are inputs to decisions. And it's a framework that's been used in a lot of areas for valuing investments in data and research, but it hasn't been applied as much. It hasn't used a lot, for example, in weather forecasts, but not nearly as much in flood forecasting. So I think there's a real opportunity here. And one of the nice things about the BOI framework is that it provides a nice structure for combining really four main modeling components. So forecast models, obviously, then decision models for how people use those forecasts, and then outcome models, which in this case are flood impact and risk models, and then finally economic valuation models for valuing those impacts. And so with that as background, our main objectives are to use case study applications to inform, test, and demonstrate key aspects of this framework, and then eventually to provide an analytical structure that we hope can guide operational assessments in the future and then be refined through future applications. So in year one, we began by conducting a pretty thorough research literature review of studies estimating the economic benefits of flood forecasts, including VOI studies. And some of the key findings from that are that there really are relatively few VOI applications in flood forecasting, none of them in the US, and generally not using empirical data. Most of them are sort of numerical simulations. And that generally, at least it was surprising to me, that there's very little empirical research on flood damage avoidance in general in the US. Most of the actual estimates of flood avoidance benefits are based on expert elicitation rather than actual data collection. So these are some key research gaps that we're addressing. So other key results are we've developed a conceptual flow diagram model for this VOI framework, which we've illustrated with flood examples, and you can see that hopefully in our poster presentation later today. We did conduct a series of interviews with federal, state, and municipal officials in North Carolina. Original interest was on focusing on emergency management decisions. Very informative, but as it turned out, we really couldn't find really good use cases based on that. And so we pivoted a little towards doing a case study in Fayetteville, North Carolina, and focusing instead on residents' behaviors with respect to flood avoidance behaviors based on their experience in Hurricanes Matthew and Florence in 2016 and 2018. So that's been our focus. And in terms of self-assessment, so we've made good progress on developing the framework, on identifying key knowledge gaps, and identifying key case study areas I mentioned in Fayetteville. We've also started to look at other case studies more in the upper Mississippi along the St. Croix River, where forecasts are pretty actively used. Thus far, though, somewhat limited in terms of dissemination, so that's going to be a focus for this coming year, is finishing up the literature review and continuing on with doing the case studies, and then eventually presenting these findings at conferences. So thank you, and I'm happy to answer questions if you have them. All right, well, thank you.
Okay, so our next presenter is Joseph Kwanzaa from Tuskegee University, and he will be talking about improving modeling and forecast product delivery in agricultural lands.
This project is being implemented by myself and a few of my colleagues. I have Dr. Fall, who is at the back there, and a few others who couldn't be here. The project aim is to utilize or improve modeling and forecast product delivery in agricultural lands. The main aim here is to utilize some of the National Water Model output and utilize those in developing decision support systems that would enhance agricultural management practices, mainly in underserved communities, to the benefit of limited resource farmers and landowners. Main objectives, like I said, is to integrate output from national water model together with other models that we are working on, mainly soil and water assessment tool, something that we'll be working on for a while. Other objectives are to establish collaborative partnership with stakeholders to address some of the issues related to water use, and then provide graduate student vulnerable professional development opportunities to foster in their career. So far, initially, we're having a few difficulties, but so far, I can report that we've been able to hire 3 graduate students on this project together with other grants that these students are working on. After a year, we managed to hire 1 postdoc who is just yet to start. We've set up the SWOT model for the Middle Alabama Basin, and it's been calibrated for surface runoff. Part calibration for groundwater is being done, but we are trying to finalize it. Over the summer, we installed a number of soil sensors across Alabama, focusing on the Black Belt counties, and I'm going to talk briefly about that. We've downloaded a number of Landsat data for the research areas that we are working on. So this shows the Alabama River Basin in geographic location, and we can see the Black Belt County across the state, and these are some of the gauges that have been used for the surface calibration, as well as the base flow calibration, which is not too perfect, but we are still working on it. And this is showing the period for validation of the model, and I'm going to come back quickly to this. This shows some of the team work and some of the graduate students that we work with installing meter sensors. We've installed 24 sensors so far in 6 different farms across the Black Belt counties. Our key result, like I said, we've installed these sensors, and these sensors get onto the cloud, so we get 50 minutes of readings of soil moisture, bulk EC, as well as soil temperature. And our aim is that we're going to utilize that, for instance, to validate some of the work, moisture product we're going to get from the National Water Model. We're going to utilize that to look at what the SWOT model is giving us. And another phase of the project is to utilize remote sensing technology to develop soil moisture indices of product and integrate those. Key achievements. We had Microsoft came on board to work with us, so they are helping us to set up what we call the Farm of the Future project, but it's also related to the bigger setup of what they call the Microsoft Azure Cloud, and they are doing that for the whole Tuskegee University, but mainly because of this project, that's why they've come in to assist that, and that has gone pretty well. In the last 1 year, we've had a number of workshops and conferences that have involved limited resource farmers in underserved communities, and we've trained them on some of the applications of modeling output. We've educated them on things like precision agriculture and how modeling output helps them in developing their irrigation management, for instance. Our main challenges have been recruiting graduate students and getting postdocs. Most of our objectives for year 1 was achieved. We had a very positive impact in terms of training of graduate students. And one good thing we did was Tuskegee hosted the first flood risk open house for a number of water counties within our area, and that was very good because we worked with Alabama Department of Environmental Management and PSW, I think, and they came in and we had the whole community come in and they were shown flood maps and things like that for them to know how the risk that they have with respect to flood event and what they can do about it. Moving forward, we plan to integrate the SWOT result that we have together with the National Water Model product in developing soil moisture variability maps. We plan to develop interactive GIS platform for visualizing some of these products to help with decision making with respect to irrigation management practices. That's it. Any questions for me?
Data set and both remote sensing.
There are existing data set. A couple of years ago, one of my graduate students used remote sensing to map monster spatial trends of monster variability within the whole state of Alabama. At that time, we had some measured soil sensor data that wasn't too accurate, and that is why this time we are going out and putting our own soil sensor data in. So we've done similar work and published, but this becomes a more comprehensive work in collaboration with CIROH.
Yeah, thank you for the presentation. I have a quick question. I think in one of the first slides, you talked about your audience being the people from the underserved communities. So I was wondering if you're gonna dedicate any effort to understand their needs for the data or the challenge that they face in using the models or the products, besides improving the models and the products.
For instance, we had to buy those sensors and install them for free. And that cost us a lot of money. They understand that they need these systems, but they don't have the resources. So the first challenge is resources. There's the other issue of training farmers to utilize some of these technologies. And then we do train them. Last year, in the last 1 year, we've had 2 trainings related to digital agriculture in general, them utilizing things like sensors, autonomous robotic systems, and drones, and things like that for the agriculture management practices. But the key thing is resources and then training. Thank you.
Our next presentation is by Dylan Lee at the University of Alabama, and he will be presenting on a water node to better utilize satellite products, applications, and services to inform decision-making in water prediction.
Yes, my name is Dylan Lee. I'm the operation manager for the water prediction node, which is a joint effort between the Water Center, CIROH, and the NOAA satellite people at NESDIS. So what do we propose to do with the water node? The main goal is we're trying to build a platform to intake and disseminate remote sensing data that's relevant to hydrological modeling, prediction, and analysis. The prototype is up at waternode.ciroh.org, and we will be adding content to this as the months progress. So some year 1 key results. Well, they hired me, so that was good. Started in April. And we have the first data product being served out of the water node data catalog. It's right now basically just mirroring 1-day VIIRS composite flood maps being produced by NESDIS. I'm planning on going in over the next month or so and doing some value-added filtering and tagging of this data set, as well as adding more flood map data. This summer, I worked with a CIROH RAU student to develop a basically just method to highlight discrepancies essentially between NOAA's hand inundation extents and remotely sensed flood maps. So here, this is comparing a rapid SAR flood map to a inundation extent computed using the hand relative elevation model. And then, yeah, this summer I also spent a lot of time like just educating, working with the RAU students. I ran some workshops for all the RIU students. I also ran a half-day of workshops for NOAA's Summer Institute, the Water Center Summer Institute. So impact self-assessments. So my hope is that the water node is going to be building out and developing a suite of capabilities that will essentially allow the water node to act as a conduit between the NOAA satellite experts at NESDIS and the National Water Center. And I also hope to serve NWC operations by increasing the resources and manpower devoted to providing timely and relevant event-based remote sensing data and analysis. Yes, and I also hope that the educational efforts of the water prediction node will basically help improve the accessibility of these remote sensing data products. And where CIROH comes into this is hopefully, you know, talking with all of you will enhance the translation of these research, more experimental remote sensing products into operations. So next step, this is kind of a graphical summary of what these Coast Watch nodes are supposed to be doing. What I've covered so far is kind of hitting at various of these aims, and hopefully I aim to keep doing those things. So yes, thank you. Any questions?
Hey, Dylan. I'm asking a question for Paul McGee from the chat. And he asks, where can he get more details on water node research? Is there a website or social media? What's the best way to contact you and access this research?
The website is up now at waternode.ciroh.org. My email address is on there. There is a project page that I will be adding essentially in the next week or two. And there I will be describing the water node's first project, which is this basically tool to compare the modeled flood inundation extents to the remotely sensed flood maps. Yeah. All right, thank you.
Our next presentation is from Asim Zia at the University of Vermont, and he will be talking about forecasting the incidence and duration of harmful algal blooms at daily, weekly, and seasonal scales.
Well, thank you very much. So I'll part of a very large team, about 18, including me, that includes graduate students and postdocs who are working this very interdisciplinary project. A lot of advancements have been made in the monitoring of harmful algal blooms. For example, on the right-hand side, you see our focal area Lake Champlain Basin. That's the Sentinel-3 image-derived product that measures the cyanobacteria index. And when you see the, especially the northeastern part, which is a transboundary system between US and Canada, when you see the red and the yellow color, that shows the algal blooms. But a lot of work needs to be done in terms of advancing the forecast of these systems at daily, weekly, and monthly scales. So our goal is to develop these kind of like advanced deep learning, especially the transformers that we are applying to understand and forecast these at these forecast lead times. But we're also using process-based integrated assessment models and a hybrid physics-based integrated assessment model, a convolutional network that would be also used in developed in the years 2 and 3 of this project. We're especially looking into understanding like how these errors in the National Water Model hydrological forecast, when we pass them through the process-based models, we'll have compounding downstream effects on the errors in the prediction of the HAPs. So in this way, we are able to understand how to develop the next gen and build an actionable intelligence in the next gen model for understanding of these errors that are going through the system, but also improve the forecast instead of these harmful algal bloom early warning, early action systems. So some of our key results, we have been able to calibrate and actually operationalize a 7-day forecast harmful algal bloom system. On the right-hand side, you would see our the simulation from the model that's just a calibrated version of the satellite data. In the poster, I can show you a GIF of our actual 7-day operational forecast model that we've set up and started in September 15th. So that's been operationally internally validated, but we'll be making it public next year in the season. In addition to the transformers that we are testing up, we've also launched 2 forecast elasticity experiments in order to disaggregate the errors in terms of the initialization of the model. For example, we are using National Weather Service forecast 5 to 7 day product. We're trying to understand the disaggregation of the errors between that cascade through from the National Weather Service model versus the hydrological model and the National Water model, as well as the nutrient concentration framework that is being used to drive the hydrological forecast of these systems. We're also looking at the long-term forecasts. For example, one of the studies that we presented in the AGU, we found that when we look at the seasonal forecast and the seasonal shifts, that the national forecast, the benefits of early action through more stringent nutrient management actions outweigh the cost of early action. So this was the work that we're doing with the stakeholders. Also, in terms of since we are comparing 2 systems, one is a heavily gauged USGS system, the other one is less gauged. And we found that the National Water Model underperforms in the less gauged system. So in a nutshell, we feel that we have an operational forecast system that shows in, and I can explain more process in terms of how we are comparing different errors across that they percolate through the hydrological weather and the nutrient forecasting into the lake system. We've also been able to present these results in a variety of places like UNFCCC, Earth System Governance, AGU, AAI conference, etc. I think we are looking into the next steps. We are hoping to finish the forecast elasticity experiments and publish those results by the end of this year. We have already piloted HAPS-Week's forecast. A lot of this work that we're doing in terms of next steps is to research to operation to research, and we want to scale it up to the larger systems moving forward. So I think that's my more or less the 3-minute presentations. Thank you. Any questions?
Thanks for the update. Can you clarify what you mean by an integrated assessment model in this context? This is clearly not the same thing as we think about it in the climate world.
Absolutely. In 3 minutes, I couldn't explain that. So integrated assessment model is a model that basically simulates, it couples global climate models or weather models with the hydrological models, and it's a very modular and scalable. So the hydrological models can be swapped in and out at the watershed scales. That is, could be National Water Model, like the Water Hydro, it could be the next gen. We have done both of those. As well as we can do like SWAT, RECIS, or any other hydrological model. We can swap into our system, into the workflow that is being running on a high performance computing system. And then we have also a land cover change agent-based model that can simulate the variety of behaviors in terms of the farmers and other kinds of nutrients coming from the urban systems and the waterways, etc. And then we have a 4-dimensional we have 2 models that basically simulate 4-dimensional hydrodynamic as well as the biogeochemical processes inside the lake system. Since we are focused on these 2 bays in the northeast part of the Lake Champlain, one of them is heavily gauged Eutrophic Bay, Missisquoi Bay, which is kind of like shared between US and Canada, and the other one is St. Albans, which is kind of like less gauged by USGS system, but it's also very like eutrophic. It's kind of like the integrated assessment model also have a feedback effects in terms of like how early actions can be taken by the policymakers, and it can simulate different scenarios. So we've been working with the stakeholders with the Lake Champlain Basin Program, Department of Environmental Conservation, EPA, as a way to understand the scenarios, the current nutrient management scenarios under the total maximum daily load plan, but also what would happen if we take early actions in terms of the seasonal shifts that are happening under the climate change scenarios. But also working with the stakeholders in terms of like setting up this harmful algal bloom early warning, early action system. So we're using an ecosystem service-based approach to reach out to 6 different groups that includes farmers, household like dog walkers, people, recreational fishers, all kinds of, all the way to the watershed managers and Department of Health. So they are actually using this approach to understand like as an active object of investigation and scenario running tool for their decision-making processes. I see George has a.
Hi, and this very interesting. I was interested in the early actions. I mean, you mentioned that communities could reduce loads, but within the time frame that you're talking about, what capabilities do they have to actually reduce nutrient loads into the water bodies?
So that's a great question. I think like the water quality and especially HABs are very like some people call them as like an extreme events that occur because of the tight coupling between the human systems and the natural systems, right? So there are a variety of couples. These are like coupled phenomena that both the systems are co-evolving. So for that reason, understanding the nutrient management actions that are being taken, but also the water flow in terms of, for example, if there are damped systems versus undamped systems. So all of those factors of the human intervention in the hydrology, but as well as the nutrient, like flows, all of those matter. So early actions are that, like governments want to assume that they can control the early action of the flow of the nutrients, but the control is the policies can be designed, written in the paper, but their enforceability and actually changing the behavior of the non-point sources of pollution is the key question here. So, for example, farmers, they can be regulated, but those regulations are not necessarily enforceable on the farmers, or like similarly other kinds of non-point source pollution, for example, the urban residents. So the question becomes like controllability is a big question in this issue, right? So for that reason, policymakers want to understand that what would be the compliance scenarios of behavioral change compliance scenarios that would lead to differential emergence of these kind of like algal bloom scenarios. So for that reason, at the climate change scales, when we're looking at the seasonal shifts and the longer change climate change impacts, those are definitely long-term planning issues versus the weekly scale forecast that we're generating. In those kind of situations, the nutrient management fluxes are basically path dependent. They're fixed. You cannot really control and manipulate them on a weekly scale, right? Of course, you can do that in the damped systems. There is much more control versus in the undamped system. So there is some controllability questions that could be investigated as well. But early actions have to be part of this integrated system as a way to understand the emergence of algal blooms across freshwater lakes, but also in estuaries as well. Thanks. Thank you very much.
So now we will have lunch. So to get into the second half of the RT4 presentations, we have Andrew Schroth, who will be doing 2 presentations, and his first one is about using the National Water Model to forecast turbidity loading to the New York City reservoir system.
So our first objective was to essentially develop algorithms in a comparative approach to what New York City DEP uses to develop a national water model for turbidity forecast. And that's an example of what we're doing there. And then we also wanted to expand turbidity monitoring networks across this interesting watershed so that we can get to a point where we can use distributed sensor networks to try and, with the national water model, forecast turbidity loading from different sediment sources within the catchment where we don't have a river forecast center forecast. So trying to get at sediment provenance using the national water model and these distributed sensor networks. Key year 1 results, like others, we have great new hires joining the team. We've developed a sensor network informed by LiDAR to deploy additional monitoring infrastructure. We've developed that initial forecasting algorithm that actually performs relatively well when the national water model gets flow right during a given storm. Impact self-assessment. A lot of this is kind of repeating myself, but we've produced conference abstracts. We're working on projects. We've got this data collection ongoing. We've compared the national water model derived turbidity forecast to the NERF forecast that New York uses. And importantly, we've also got additional proposals that are going in, building off of this work that are exciting. In this case, the USGS actually. So our next steps, we're going to continue refining that loading algorithm, present that at AGU, develop papers based on that. We're going to continue working with our expanded monitoring data to develop that kind of site-specific forecast derived from the national water model. And then also continue to work on that more advanced algorithm using deep learning techniques to to predict sediment provenance during any given storm. That's all I've got. Thank you. Happy to take questions. Dr. Ogden.
There's been a fair, thank you. There's been a fair bit of research done in those watersheds about storm flow generation. How do you feel about using your sensors to get a better understanding for processes that are happening there? And is anybody going to develop a model to try to simulate that?
The USGS has a new project that's ongoing, looking at that exactly and trying to develop a sediment budget for those particular watersheds. My group in particular, what we've done in the past is looked at hysteresis and sediment and hydrograph time series to try and look at process and source. So we have the postdoc who's going to work on that. I mean, the cool thing about this particular watershed, it's the ultimate monitored watershed for turbidity. There's such a distributed network with high frequency time series. They've gone back a fair ways. So you have the potential to really leverage those data and study process and also develop forecast. So it's kind of an optimal site. If you want data and you want to do machine learning, there's a ton of data relative to long flow time series go back a long time, but these like high frequency water quality time series are a newer area where we can leverage those kind of data sets. So that's a very active area of our research. Anyone else? Okay. Well, I guess I would make one plug, come to my poster. And also, I'd love to interact in particular with groups that are working on correcting the National Water Model Forecast or improving it, because obviously all this and the next project that I'm going to talk about all kind of hinge on having a good flow forecast, because you're leveraging that relationship between the flow monitoring data and the concentration data. So please come by my poster, and I kind of don't want to reinvent the wheel in that space, and I'd love to be efficient there and learn from you. So this is another similar project. In this case, the use case is really formulated around TMDLs in particular, which is something that the entire country struggles in reaching in impaired streams. What we're looking to do here is to develop national water model derived nutrient forecasts that can inform management communities and also inform models like Asim talked about in his presentation. There we go. So our goals and objectives, again, use national water model output to forecast nutrient loading, again, leveraging concentration discharge relationships. In the case of solutes, these relationships tend to be more complicated because it's very dependent on the source of the solute within a watershed. Again, what we're going to try and do is start with initial locations where we have high frequency sensor derived concentration discharge time series, where we can develop these kind of forecast models that are forced by national water model flow. We then want to expand to the TMDL scale in the state of Vermont. This is a really big deal in Vermont, where we're trying to meet total maximum daily load mandated by the EPA for phosphorus in the Lake Champlain Basin. That's the map I'm showing on the far right. Of course, those are also the models that we'll need to feed Asim's model that he mentioned earlier. While we're doing that, we're working on developing low-cost sensors, because the sensors that I've been using in the past are like 30 grand a pop. So it's hard to do a distributed monitoring network at that price point. So if we can get lower cost sensors, we can start to distribute our sensor technologies across watersheds and different nutrient time sources to try and get it nutrient provenance during different storm events, predict where nutrients are coming from, which can then, of course, inform management. So this is another kind of area of emphasis in Vermont. Key results, again, new hires completed. We've been working on developing these sensor prototypes and engineering. We've developed a geospatially informed network for our focal watersheds, and we have an initial phosphorus loading algorithm that can be fed national water model output. Self-assessment, in this case, we have a couple reds that weren't, that kind of held us up. We had postdoc visa issues, so one of the sensor postdocs wasn't hired till July. So we're a little slow there. And then more importantly, I think at the focal watersheds, so these are smaller watersheds in Vermont, we've had poor performance in the national water model. That was more, we were surprised at how it was doing in these kind of smaller headwater developed watersheds. So we have to develop a forecast correction algorithm before we can develop a meaningful forecast derived from CQ, essentially. But we've hired high quality postdocs, and both of these projects, we've done a lot of front end stakeholder engagement, which I think is really important. These kind of applied projects, conference abstracts, papers are being developed, ongoing data collection, and that initial algorithm we've developed. So our next steps, we're going to continue working on refining that nutrient loading algorithm with machine learning, ongoing low-cost sensor development so we can get those low-cost sensors out in the environment, tracking nutrient sources during different storms, and then develop papers and then expand that nutrient forecast so that we're doing distributed sensing to really inform managers and provide stakeholders with additional data. So kind of similar projects, but very exciting, I think, in the water quality space. Questions? Sure.
How much better would the, I guess the P forecast get if the Q forecast was perfect?
Sorry, I didn't hear quite the end.
So you mentioned the issues with the water model forecast for performance. How much better would how much better would your models get if the discharge forecast were perfect?
I mean, we're still working on quantifying that. I can show you some plots on the poster, but I mean, in this case, I didn't bring a hydrograph, but what we're really missing are the peaks in those particular hydrographs, especially in the agricultural watersheds, I think, because there's something that it's not capturing in the developed space. And that's when you're talking about water quality and nutrient loading, that's kind of what matters. So we need to resolve that, but we have postdocs that are working on developing algorithms to correct that. But again, that's where I'd really love to work with other folks so that I'm not a hydrologist, but I think everyone's probably dealing with some degree of that problem, and we should work together so that we have can learn off of each other. Thank you for the question. And please come by the poster.
Our next presenter is Terry Hogue from the Colorado School of Mines, and who will be talking about daily CONUS scale stream temperature remote sensing with NextGen.
Okay, great. Thank you. And we're going to stay on the water quality theme here for a little bit. So it was nice to see kind of another PI work on some water quality issues in this kind of theme 4, where we really want to develop products for stakeholders and decision makers, things that they don't normally have ready access to. So why stream temperature, right? There are gauges out there in the United States, and I'll show you a map here in a minute. There's about 1,400 sensors that are out there, observations. They're usually coupled with the USGS gauges. But of those 1,400 gauges, about 75% of them have less than 10 years of data. So to look at long-term trends and issues in these sensors, and to think about going forward and how we monitor for climate change, we need something that can predict these values at kind of better spatial coverage and temporal coverage. So our goal is to develop a machine learning model to predict those daily stream flow values at any point in a stream network and at small rivers. So much of the work that's been done in the past has been at larger river systems. There are some regional models like the Northwest model that has done a good job of predicting stream temperatures up in the Northwest, but we don't have anything for small streams at the CONUS scale. So the first year objectives included developing that model and then tuning and validating it for across the United States, and then ultimately integrated into the NextGen system. And then we're working on benchmarking protocols with Andy Wood and others at Mines and in CIROH to think about how we really kind of benchmark the data that we're getting and the modeling. So again, I mentioned there's 1,400 gauges across the United States. So this is a map of kind of some of the early results that we have with this random forest machine learning model that integrates MODIS land surface temperature and a few geophysical static variables, and also uses some climatology. We have a median RMSE of around 2 degrees C, which is pretty good at the CONUS scale for this system. But the nice thing is we are predicting values down to a 5-meter width of river. So that's pretty small compared to most models that are out there. So we used about 70% of those gauges for training the model and about 30% of those gauges for testing. And the model outperforms the climatology on those ungaged basins or ungaged locations. Those are our testing data. So it does pretty well. And then again, our goal is to then kind of incorporate it into forecasts in the next gen. And you can see kind of the ecoregions here. And on our poster this afternoon or later today, we'll have more information on how that model performs across the ecoregions. But it's pretty consistent. We don't see any real kind of regional patterns yet where we see higher or lower errors. There's a few spots that stand out, and we're looking more closely at those. So we have the computer code. Everything's going up on GitHub. That'll be available soon for some of our progress reports here. We also have a monthly model. That's where we started with this. That was kind of some of our very early work that was prior to the CIROH funding. That is already up on GitHub. We have some manuscripts in review, one on that monthly predictions, and then the daily model is currently being drafted. And we also have done some seasonal assessment on this kind of stream flow, stream temperature data that's out there. We're looking at kind of seasonal trends in that. This will be the first product that's kind of readily available for decision makers at kind of the small stream scale. So we're kind of excited about that, and we want to get that information out there for folks to use. And again, we kind of have done the student and postdoc training with students. We were pretty lucky in getting some postdocs and student on this right away. And then again, we're working kind of the benchmarking. We continue to look at the code and think about other kinds of machine learning models. We're also kind of looking at spatial variability in the model and thinking about how it performs at higher elevations, which we're interested in the Rocky Mountain West. And then again, looking at kind of how we get this into an operational hindcasting and forecasting system. And then we have another project that's going to go forward in the next, that's just starting now on disturbance modeling in the next gen. And we want to see then how disturbance affects these kind of stream temperature trends. And again, like everyone else, we have manuscripts, and then we'll be at AGU this year talking more about this proposal. Okay, and I'm happy to take questions. Yep, right here.
Do you plan, or did you look, or just from your experience, comparing this to physically based models of water temperature?
That is part of our proposal. We haven't done that yet. So I have some prior work in urban systems with those physically based models. We may do some of that comparison, but as you probably know, the physically based models take a lot. They're data intensive and hard to run. So I think we're focused on comparing to observations to start, and then we may do some test cases in some of the, I guess, test bed systems, and maybe look at some physically based models, but it'll probably be limited because of the data needed for those models. They're tough to run, right, and validate. Good question. Any other questions? Okay, thank you. I'll be around later for the poster.
Our next presenter is Ryan Johnson from the University of Alabama, talking about enhancing water supply forecasting for systems management.
Hi, good afternoon, everybody. So yeah, I'm obviously the PI on this project, but I can't, Shahab, I don't know where you're out here. He's a postdoc working on the project with me. And then we just got a new grad student, which is Savlon, who has the mic. So much thanks to these additional help on this project. So our proposed goals and objectives. So first, the ultimate goal is to connect the national water model with some kind of water resources tool or a modeling product to actually, provide water resource management meaningful use of the national water model to help, their decision-making process. And so, so I'm from Salt Lake City. And so the Great Salt Lake is always in the news. It's, it's very difficult to control water levels, and there's a lot of environmental consequences when the lake goes too low. So we want to use the national water model to help inform lake level water decision making. And so we're kind of out of order here on the bullets, but that's that full third bullet down. And so before we can connect the national water model to the Great Salt Lake model, we need to see where do we make that connection. So we realize we need to make some kind of evaluation framework so we could do that. And then we also need to, once we, identify a location to make that, to make that connection, we need to develop a way to actually bridge that connection between the national water model and GSLM. And those are kind of our goals going into everything. And then we also wanted to present the research findings. Some key results. So very excited to share with everyone Rosette, which is the research-oriented streamflow evaluation tool, version 1.0. And that is a multi-parameter full cone scale evaluation tool in a Jupyter notebook environment. So you can see how the National Water Model performs on version 2.1, the retrospective, to all the existing, I think 3,000 to 5,000 USGS gauges. So that I'll show a tag so you can go to our GitHub and download that. So we found that in our watershed, the National Water Model actually performed very well in the headwater catchments. But then as you move closer to the Great Salt Lake, performance decreased. So we can see that with kind of this image here, kind of that middle left right there. And so our hypothesis was due to water resource infrastructure. And so what we did, there's lots of dams, there's water diversions, there's a lot of agriculture that's taking water out of the river the National Water Model is not accounting for. And so part of our, to solve that problem, we can't just put the, poor predictions into the Great Salt Lake integrated model. So how do we bridge that gap? How do we improve those predictions to account for that water resource infrastructure? So we just started getting, what Savalon's been working on is creating a machine learning tool that accounts for those, different processes from water resource infrastructure. But we're trying to, develop for one watershed here and then use that same model to apply it to the other watersheds. So we've been prototyping that framework. Then the self-assessment, Rosette's definitely a needed tool. And I think it's very impactful to a lot of people here. We developed it targeted at grad students, people who are actively working on the model. And they can see if, if they are building a machine learning model, can they add it to improve the prediction of the model? And then we obviously need to represent water resource infrastructure within the National Water Model predictions. We use this framework to create a REU program at University of Alabama over the summer, and then multiple presentations at key conferences. So next steps, collaborate with more CIROH members. We've been talking with RTI while we were here. We have Shahab developing the Streamflow Extreme Event data set. So rather than a time series evaluate model, find some key events at different, as Fred will probably cringe at me, recurrence intervals that are key events that we want to look at to see how the model performs. We're going to finalize our machine learning coupler and then connect those inputs from the National Water Model to the Great Salt Lake. Here's our tags for if you want to check out our GitHub pages. We just this morning put Rosette up on our 2I2C interface, so anyone can go start playing with it. And it's fast. You can put in different land use, land cover parameters. You can put in different hydrological unit codes, and you can just put in individual reach to see how the National Model performs there. And we've got external funding to put it on our CIROH data portal so that we can share that with utilities so they can see what can they expect for model performance. I have a poster later today. Hopefully it's printed, and happy to take any questions.
So the Rosette tool looks really awesome. I'm curious though, I thought the National Water Model assimilated the data at the gauges. And so how do you compare the performance of the model at the gauges if the gauges have been assimilated, or is it not doing that?
So this is on the retrospective data set. So this one is, I guess I'll have to look to Ed for that answer, but they're not assimilating data for the retrospective data set. All right, thank you.
Next up, we have Hamed Moftakari from the University of Alabama presenting on coastal nature-based solutions to mitigate flood impacts and enhance resilience.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Hamed Moftakari from the University of Alabama, and I'm presenting on behalf of a fantastic research group of people. PIs from UA include Hamid Murakami, Julia Terry, Nate Jones, and Abby Shao. And you see the list of people whom I'm fortunate enough to work with them all. And we have also collaborators outside UA from University of South Carolina, from Water Institute of the Gulf, and Mississippi State University Extension. So in terms of project goals and objectives. The first objective was about coupling hydrologic hydrodynamics. I see you've already seen those already among the priorities of multiple agencies, so I don't need to emphasize the importance of such coupling. And we are going to even extend it to beyond hydrologic hydrodynamics into biological models for the specific objective of the project, because it's about nature-based solutions and how nature-based solutions are going to help make coastal communities resilient against compound flooding and sea level rise. Second objective here would be communicating with diverse group of stakeholders. And I guess this project is among those that definitely breaks the silos that could potentially form around research teams. And you can see multiple research teams already involved, while heavily technical. That communication with the stakeholders and getting them involved is a major goal and objective here, and also characterizing land cover patterns for parameterization of that coupled hydrologic hydrodynamic biologic modeling. In terms of project flow and for the first year, this project, we truly believe in stakeholder engagement, and co-development knowledge is not just a fancy word. We start with the stakeholders and we continue communicating with them. And that's one reason that it brought up yesterday among the projects to be highlighted among research team 4, because these are the core collaborators in this project. So we already started our communication. We formed a group of stakeholders around Mobile Bay with the interest around flood management. And so these are pictures from our first workshop back in April, and we've already scheduled our second one in November and the follow-up one in January. So we continue working with them on first scenario selection to see basically which scenarios they see relevant to the flooding around Mobile Bay in terms of sea level rise trends and compound flooding, which compounding mechanisms they would consider relevant to their study area and the priorities that their agencies they're representing, and in terms of design life and success stories, success metrics for that. And for those of you who like QR codes, that QR code takes you to a GIS map, which basically digitizes the input that we receive from all those stakeholders. What are the hotspots around Mobile Bay? What are the potential and implemented nature-based sites around the Mobile Bay? So basically, with all those information, we made it all publicly available. We get good understanding about Mobile Bay, how it's working around in terms of flooding and potential for nature-based solutions. And we also, to make it a really co-production of knowledge, we did mental mapping. So we tried to understand how the flood is understood around across agencies around Mobile Bay, and how we can better improve and how we can provide reliable and understandable information for those end users. And so that was for first phase of this story to select scenarios. And of course, we are focusing on compound flooding, which requires hydrologic hydrodynamics modeling. Next gen is going to be our hydrologic module down here, which is going to be fit into ATSIC, which is going to be our circulation hydrodynamics model. And you've already heard about the difficulties of routing. We are trying to explore different opportunities like HEC-RAS models that receives feedback and gives information towards can work as a routing module under hydrologic modeling. And in terms of site selection, we have already collected all those information, and our biological heroes have been already to the field to collect relevant information to be able to parameterize the biological model to be coupled to the hydrodynamics model. So we collect in situ data to parameterize our models. In terms of impact assessment, substantial progress I've already made toward coupled modeling in the MBS analysis. We already have interagency discussions with ERDC, USAC, Mobile District to make sure that what we're generating are going to remain valuable to them and usable by them. And diverse group of stakeholders have already been engaged. I encourage you to scan that QR codes to take to the full report with all what have happened during that workshop and what were the outcome of all those discussions. And for the next steps in the following year, we will continue refining those coupled modeling platforms to generate relevant flood risk maps all over the Mobile Bay for the proposed flood scenarios and sea level rise scenarios. We also continue working to consider the inputs that we got, the data that we collect through the field measurements to parameterize a marsh model to look into the behavior of the wetlands under various scenarios of compound flooding and sea level rise in the future. And that marsh model is going to be coupled with the ATSIC to generate a so-called hydromem, which is going to help us see how our behavior and patterns are going to be changing under various decisions. And so through those stakeholder engagements, we also come up with some agreeable success metrics to see whether if nature-based solutions are going to be effective enough. And so their effectiveness is going to be evaluated. So in the following year, we continue perfecting models, field data collection, MBS performances, disseminate science through manuscripts which are already in prep, conferences that you see here, and the stakeholder engagements which are already scheduled for the following year to be continued, to get back to them to see, okay, how they like the first round of results, and then refine them to their needs to make sure at the end of this project, we're going to have some useful information for them. I guess that's okay. You have a good day.
Next, we'll have Melissa Kenny back up to give a second presentation on building knowledge to support equitable climate resilience in the upper Mississippi River Basin.
Thank you. It's great to see you all again. This is a project that started in 2021 with the Climate Equity Roundtables. It was a priority that was set out by Rick Spinrad to really think through how we can develop climate equity in some of the places across our federal government regions that have received inequitable access to a lot of the NOAA data and product and services. So what emerged from that was part of NOAA's strategic plan. Goal number 2 was a goal focused on climate equity. There were pilot projects that were created across those regions. And each of those regions, there were different priorities that were focused on given the emergent priorities that were identified from the stakeholders. This is a project that was developed from those climate roundtables in the upper Mississippi River Basin. And we were asked to carry forward the research that was focused on that climate equity priority. So this is a project that involves a team of probably about 20 people. We work with 5 different NOAA entities. We work with the NOAA Regional Collaboration Network, the National Integrated Drought Information System, the NWS Ops Proving Ground, NCEI's Regional Climate Director, NOAA North Central River Forecast Center. This is also because it's a high priority pilot project that's part of one of the keystone deliverables for NOAA's strategic plan. Every 6 months, there's a briefing on this project as well as the other regional projects to Deputy NOAA Administrator Janie Bavici. So the goal of this project is really focused on developing projections of flow in the main stem of the upper Mississippi River Basin so we can understand changes in seasonality related to flood and drought predictions, floods and droughts over the next 80 to 100 years. As part of that, community engagement is a core piece of it. And there's 2 components to the community engagement. One is engagement with technical stakeholders, really ensuring that the results that we are developing are structured in a way that support the use of that information in decision-making processes, but also the reuse of the data and outputs in ways that integrate into existing models, datas, and other regional products. The second piece is literally a process of trust building with communities that have been unheard and not part of the decision-making process within the upper Mississippi River Basin. We are literally just getting people that are willing to pick up the phone after we've spent time listening and sharing and hearing their voice so that at the end of this, we'd be able to move forward with new projects that would really focus and center communities that are Justice 40 that have been underfunded. So that's the priority associated with this. We've done a number of things. We've really advanced the modeling. The addition of both climate as well as land into those river forecast models will be an advancement that will be operational by the end of this project time period. The community engagement, the broad-based dissemination will integrate and reuse the product into a wide range of organizations, as well as think about how we can advance climate readiness and climate resilience for communities across the entire region. We're not going anywhere. This is part of long-term capacity building. So we've done a bunch of things. Happy to share them at the poster session. There's more things to do. So be on the lookout for things that we might be sharing as the model results come out and we start working with our many partners in the region to both share what we've learned from the models, but also listen and learn and share back to NOAA what we're hearing. Thank you. I'm happy to take questions if there are any. Oh, yes. Hi, Anne.
As someone who grew up in the upper Mississippi River Basin, I'm just curious if you can talk about the number of different communities you're engaging and over what sort of geographic spread, because it's a huge area.
Yeah, it's 5 states. So basically upper Mississippi River Basin is defined as St. Louis northward. To identify communities, we're using a combination of different kinds of social vulnerability metrics that are defined by various federal agencies and used as part of the Justice 40 initiative to start identifying communities that have been under-resourced and underserved. We're ground truthing that with conversations that we're having with state agencies, other organizations, environmental justice organizations to understand what's missing from the data so that we can get a strong landscape of sort of hotspots along that area. In terms of organizations, we've partnered with the Upper Mississippi River Basin Association, which coordinates a lot of the state agencies and the work that is happening in the Upper Mississippi Basin states, as well as a number of other well-networked organizations. The community engagement piece of it and the trust building, we're working with 2 Black-owned community organizations, Rainbow Research, as well as Transformational Solutions, to start the process of trust building, start the networking with environmental justice organizations, and identify some of the communities, both that they've worked in and that we want to establish relationships in, especially focusing on the main stems. So that second piece of starting to reach out to communities, that's what we're doing this fall. So if any of you all have any connections, I'd welcome a conversation so that we can make sure that we're building capacity and really creating some of the connections so that then when you all want to do work in the Upper Mississippi River Basin, we can partner together so that then when we're engaging organizations and communities, we're not working at cross purposes or sharing mixed messages, because it's really counterproductive to a lot of our larger goals. Thank you.
And our last presenter for Research Theme 4 is Kristen Robb at Kouazi, who will be talking about an analysis and demonstration of the National Water Model's applicability to community resilience planning.
Hi, everyone. So my project is really centering on sort of a new user space for the National Water Model. The National Water Model has historically kind of been explored in the emergency management space, which is a bit on the shorter term. So we are exploring resilience planning, which is kind of akin to a more longer term application. So our goals were pretty simple. They were to identify how the National Water Model could be used in community resilience related planning, and then to identify actionable ways in which the National Water Center could then support this use. And our methodology that we used was just a set of interviews with 6 geographically diverse communities across the US. And then after those interviews, we held what we call a collaborative session, which is just bringing NOAA, National Water Center staff, and those interviewees into the same space to co-generate a set of recommendations for both of these questions. So our key results, and again, this is a super high level. The primary result is probably that 65% of the resilience-related stakeholders that we engaged in this study had actually never heard of the National Water Model before. But when they did hear about it, they were very enthusiastic. They had a ton of ideas for how it could potentially be used and a lot of recommendations for how they think that it could be more accessible to themselves. So our primary results are in the form of what we call recommendations, which are actionable steps co-generated by these interviewees and NOAA National Water Center staff that can then be taken at the end of this project. So they're directed to 2 categories. Those intended for the communities are really in the form of hypothetical use cases. 65% of them hadn't heard of the model. These are hypothetical ways in which they could use it. And then those directed towards the National Water Center are really more in terms of accessibility. They had a lot of recommendations for how they would like to learn about the model. So suggestions for where and how NOAA could present and share about the model. They had a suite of different things about how they think it could be made more accessible. And then they also had a lot of requested features and capabilities as well. And I'm just teasing this because each of these communities resulted in like a 5 or 6 or 7-page table of recommendations. So if you're interested in any more specific examples, please come find me later. There is a wealth of data coming out of this. So in terms of the impact self-assessment, what we think the successes were that we really identified a promising new area of application for the National Water Model. People were very excited to use this in this longer term planning space, and they had a lot of really actionable ideas for how it could be used. We also developed actionable next steps to increase the accessibility of the National Water Model. I should note that many of these resilience-related planners, while they use water data, they themselves are not hydrologists, so it's kind of expanding into a new area of use. We also developed a process for successful community engagement that can be both used in continuing this work and also in kind of the creation of other climate tools or services. And then we developed really strong relationships between both our research team, our collaborators, and the participants, which we are now leveraging in the second phase of this study. So our second phase, which we have just begun a couple months ago, is now taking our research into action. We, as I mentioned, came up with a ton of different recommendations from both the communities and NOAA. So now we're trying them out. So right now we are engaging stakeholders that we met during phase 1. We are actually trying out how the National Water Model can be used in their work. And this is in a variety of different contexts. We are also going to develop features that were requested by the stakeholders in phase 1 to make the National Water Model more accessible to them. And some of these include potentially creating a kind of a tool comparison. Sort of there's an abundance of tools and models out there. How do you kind of, I guess, advertise in a way, get them to know that this is the model for them and what parameters does it have to increase their ability to take the time to learn a new model. And also communications and planning language. As I mentioned, what we were finding part of this study was really an exploration into what is resilience planning in communities. And what we found is that means it's a whole ton of different stakeholders in a whole lot of different areas with a whole different range of backgrounds. So many of them, you can't speak to them like a hydrologist because they're not. So how can we help reframe these materials in different verbiages to make it more accessible to them? Yes, it's really high level.
I was wondering if you have thought about whether the development of the national model and the tools, if there's a feedback from what you hear from the planning community on what the model should do and the resolution and the processes and so forth. We understand this is trying to get the national model out to them. So I'm thinking about the feedback.
Yeah, the feedback. So I should note that this project kind of originated from a much smaller project. So honestly, the entire design here has been in coordination with NOAA, and that's why we've been partnering so closely. Our goal, I mean, they helped create these. Our goal is to get those recommendations directly back. Again, to have that feedback loop, both NOAA informing potential uses for the community and helping them along that process, and then also getting those recommendations back to NOAA. So one of our key deliverables, ideally out of phase 2, which because NOAA is undergoing a big website renovation, is to ideally get a lot of these onto the websites. That way it can kind of, anyway, put these things that were creating to make the model more accessible into NOAA services to then increase the accessibility to a lot of other communities. Because we interviewed 83 people for this study. So, I mean, that's a nice little chunk, but that's not everyone. So it's sort of, there's still a lot of people who could be reached in this space to potentially use the National Water Model in their work.
Yeah, the resilience study was really interesting. I was just wondering how, on the topic of your 83 community participants, how representative do you think that sample was?
That's we didn't.
And what I mean by that isn't it's not a statistics question.
Yeah, okay.
It's more of a, I guess it's probably more of like a diversity question.
Yeah, I would say we did go for geographic diversity for one. So these were across the United States. What I do say is we also got quite a different suite of at least like disciplinary diversity and also job title diversity. I'd say we went pretty well there. That was one of our findings. You could really call this first phase kind of a landscape analysis. We were really kind of poking out, because resilience planning is an academic term, you know, so there's a lot of like, what does that actually look like in practice? And I would say that's not something I got to highlight here, but I do say that that's one of our big key findings is we have a much better understanding of, I honestly am kind of dropping the term resilience planning, but what that looks like in a community. I think that we did a pretty good job of getting a very diverse range of different job titles and backgrounds and anyway, yes, I think we did a good job there. And I would actually be even curious to extend this even further and see potential new applications as well. All right, thank you.